take it away. All right, hello everyone, and welcome to another honors thesis presentation. I'm Jessica Campbell, and I'm delighted to introduce an advisee and mentee of mine, Claire Jennings. She is a double major in English, literature and writing, and professional writing and rhetoric. So she knows the reading and she knows the writing. She's also an editor of the McKendree Review, our wonderful campus newspaper. And she will be speaking today on the doppelganger usage in The Picture of Dorian Gray. And I'll simply say that this paper grew out of an honors class that Claire took with me last year, I guess. It was just this time last spring that we were taking this class. What a long year it has been. And so we explored this idea kind of in greater breadth. And then she decided to really dig in to The Picture of Dorian Gray. So I will let her tell you all about doppelgangers. Claire, take it away.
All right. So as Dr. Campbell said, I'm presenting on the doppelgangers in the novel The Picture of Dorian Gray by Oscar Wilde. So just a little bit about Oscar Wilde. He was married with 2 young sons in London, but one important thing to note was that his novel and his plays were eventually used as evidence of his homosexuality, and he was convicted and imprisoned for being gay. And he published a lot of plays and poems before that. He was known as a prominent literary figure. He was somebody that was upper class in society. So it was a shocking turn of events. So I'll just go over what a doppelganger is. So it's essentially just the double or the second self of someone. And a scholar by the name of C.F. Kepler, his discussion of doppelgangers is the most thoroughly discussed as far as literature goes. And he displays the doppelganger conventions in several different ways. He has a whole list of the way that doppelgangers can be used in literature. But some of the major ones that he goes over between the use of the uncanny and the relationship between humans and arts is going to be the second self as tempter, the second self of vision of horror, the second self as a savior. And Wilde introduces the idea of a doppelganger at the beginning of the novel when he centers on Basil Howard's fixation of art as imitation of life rather than life as imitating art. The novel was Wilde's only novel. He published a lot of plays and poetry other than that. The very first version of the novel was actually just a short story, and it was published in a magazine in June of 1890. The novel has 3 main characters. Basil Howard is the artist that creates the portrait of Dorian. Lord Henry is sort of a bad influence on Dorian, and then Dorian Gray obviously is the most prominent character. Basil creates the portrait of Dorian, and that portrait serves as his double because the portrait absorbs the sins and cruelty that Dorian is guilty of. Dorian commits a lot of heinous acts, such as murder at several points throughout the novel. And even just him being cruel to other characters in the novel, rather than that leaving any kind of physical mark on his actual body, that transfers over to the portrait. And he does not age because the portrait just absorbs all of the things that society sees as negative. When Dorian murders one of the main characters in a fit of rage, over the portrait's tormenting of him, the portrait definitely absorbs that, and it grows significantly uglier in Dorian's opinion. Dorian eventually decides to destroy the painting, but he discovers by killing his doppelganger, he also kills himself. So the role of the portrait in the novel is that it most closely represents the second self as a vision of horror. And the portrait obviously serves as absolving Dorian of his sins, but also simultaneously reminds him of them. After Dorian discovers the painting's abilities, he became extremely paranoid about the possibility of someone coming across it. And he sank into a state of delusion and paranoia. So he demanded that the portrait be hidden away at all costs, and he locked it up in a room to which he only had access because he was so afraid of someone discovering it. He was also filled with despair, the painting's growing ugliness. And he decided that he would never again tempt innocence. He would be good. Perhaps if his life became pure, he would be able to expel every sign of evil passion from the face. So he essentially decided that after the painting started to grow uglier, when he was committing these crimes and being cruel towards the other characters, he decided he would just reverse his ways and reclaim his conscience, but obviously that does not happen. The relationship between Dorian and the portrait is obviously very tense. The painting serves as an extension of Dorian. It's a pristine, cherished version of the sinful man that would ultimately trade with its human counterpart. Dorian, at the beginning of the novel, is noted as someone of extreme beauty, which is why Basil creates the portrait of him in the first place. And several characters throughout the novel note that he's extremely beautiful, and everyone seems to really value that about him. But not only is the double as an actual artwork of him, but the craft of his body and face are artistic intentions by his creator. So when Basil does the portrait, he really focuses on Dorian's beauty, and that is ultimately why Dorian is so tormented by the fact that the painting grows uglier. So the destruction of the double, the portrait's similarities, and the hold over his conscience slowly drove Dorian to madness. So he attempted to destroy it in a fit of rage. But with the slaughter of his non-human double, Dorian realized that to erase his past is to erase himself. So because the painting was absorbing all of the things he did in the past, by killing it, he effectively ended his own life. And then rather than the portrait continuing to act as a reflection of the evil ways and ugliness, the characteristics transfer themselves to Dorian's physical body. So once the painting was destroyed, the painting then became the beautiful image. And when Dorian's staff discovered him, he had absorbed all the aging and the ugliness and the marks of cruelty that the portrait had previously had. So now I guess we can take some questions.
Yes, and people are welcome to put questions in the chat or to simply say them out loud with their voices. Claire, I wonder if you could perhaps say a little bit more about the other characters in the novel. That was something that I know we've talked about a little bit, that didn't end up making it into sort of this central track of your work here, but that is also interesting in thinking about the doppelganger stuff in this novel, right? And sort of the violation of the boundaries of the self and that kind of thing. So I wonder if maybe you could say a little bit more about who these other two guys are, right? Who's Basil Hallward, who's Lord Henry, the bad influence, and so forth, and kind of how do they fit in with what's going on in the novel?
Yeah, Basil, as I said, was the artist who created the portrait, and he originally created this portrait because he had a very strong fixation on Dorian and his beauty. So the novel that most people know, The Picture of Dorian Gray, is a censored version. The uncensored version is not explicit. It just has a lot more homosexual themes, which society had deemed as wrong at the time, so it wasn't published that way. So Basil Howard's fixation on Dorian seems to stem from an attraction to him. And throughout the novel, as Dorian gives attention to other characters, Basil is distraught. He's upset. He wants to be with Dorian and spend time with Dorian, and he's upset when Dorian pays more attention to Lord Henry. Lord Henry is an interesting guy. He has a lot of interesting ideas on what life is and what it should be. He and his wife, for example, they don't tell each other what they're doing or where they're going. They purposefully lie to each other about where they've been. It's kind of a game that they have. And he says that, women marry because they're desperate, and men marry because they're like worn down into it, and both are miserable. And he has a lot of really interesting ideas that he passes on to Dorian, that Dorian ultimately kind of uses later on in the novel in ways that I think Lord and Henry didn't intend. I think that to answer your question, the doppelgangers, we do see doppelgangers today in some films and movies. Stephen King, in several of his novels, he has one called The Outsider. There's a use of doppelgangers in that, because one of the main characters finds that like an alternate version of himself is committing crimes. And I would say a doppelganger, as we kind of know it in society now, is just an alternate representation of an individual. And I think we still see it to some extent. I think in the picture of Dorian Gray, today we still see that as a novel that has a lot of doppelganger images in it.
Do you remember did we talk about it? We probably did in the class. Do you remember like the literal German translation of doppelganger, or German meaning of doppelganger?
I might need you to remind me of that.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. It's like double goer or double walker.
Yeah.
Gang is like go, like Eingang is entrance in German, right? So double walker. So someone, like a twin, could be a twin, could be a physical double, could be sort of an emotional double, could be a hallucination of yourself, all sorts of fun possibilities. Yeah. Yeah. Once you start looking for them, you see them everywhere. Take it from me.
Yeah, that's very true. That's a good question. I would say, the portrait is more of I would say a catalyst for his inner demons to manifest. Well, actually, I think both are true. I think it's a catalyst in the sense that it kind of gives him permission to act in these sinful ways and commit these acts, because then he's not having that reflection on his own physical body, because in part some of the characters have said like, oh, he couldn't be guilty of this murder because there's not evil in his eyes, on his physical body, and things like that. So he definitely uses the portrait to manifest those inner demons. But I think the portrait is also sort of an antagonist, because it is the evil version of him in some senses, because it's absorbing that. But I think it really acts more just as his conscience. It's just kind of a manifestation of his conscience. Yeah, thanks.
Could spend a whole half hour talking about the answer to that question, probably. Any other questions for Claire about Doppelgänger?